so far off, but it's down to a single digit, 8 years. So one of our speakers yesterday, I have been following the conversation, mentioned how she missed a stream that she once saw in her village. I come from Uganda. On the way to the airport in Entebbe, you will see that Lake Victoria, what used to be a shoreline that our parents took us to as a beach, is just a water level that even I am afraid of putting my toe into because I'm not sure how deep the water is now. Lake Victoria is flooding in some parts. And that's just part of what I see on a day-to-day basis. But what is happening all over Africa is not beautiful, but it can change. And we are going to change it. I believe it's all of us doing something. So global warming and its climatic upshot is threatening Africa, its coastal and its marine regions, its water resources, its economies. Now, those economies include fish, which is also happening. The numbers are declining because of the rising temperatures. Now, joining us to find a smart way forward, we've just had a panel before this was about solutions and innovations. We're going to try and perhaps discuss with the 4 panelists that I have a smart way forward. Joining us physically, we have Dr. Lydia Atieno Olaka, who is a senior lecturer at the Nairobi Technical University in Kenya. Seated next to her, we have Mr. Eric Naivasha, who is the Associate Director, Energy and Environment Equity Group Foundation. You're most welcome. And now joining us virtually, we do have 2 speakers. We have Professor Christopher Gideon. He's joining us from Ghana, and he is a founding director, the Institute of Environmental and Sanitation Studies, the University of Ghana. Now joining us from Israel, we also have Engineer Tal Shimon, who is a former water commissioner from Israel. You're both most welcome. Now getting us into the conversation, Dr. Lydia, you have over 11 years of experience when it comes to taking a look at projects, some of which have to do with the impact of climate change and the variability of water resources. Over these past 11 years, Dr. Lydia, what are you seeing? How is climate change affecting our water bodies?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you to the Nation Group. Yes, when you look at Africa, and especially here back at home in East Africa, we can appreciate that we do not have one climate. We have a range from the semi-arid to very humid areas, so areas that are receiving less than 200 millimeters of rainfall to those that are receiving 4,000. So those are really humid. And with that, with the rainfall, the distribution of water resources is also in line with those particular climatic or rainfall patterns. So, for example, like in the western part of Kenya, central, western, and towards Uganda, that is very humid. And there are a number of lakes, and we also have a lot of rivers there that people are relying on for various ecosystem services. But also, the other thing that we have to appreciate is that we have the East African Rift that has quite a number of lakes. The eastern arm of the rift has at least 10 different lakes of different sizes. However, most of them are saline and are not for domestic consumption. So they support many of the wildlife or the parks that we have in the area. And then when you go to the western arm of the rift, which is on the other side of Uganda, all the way towards Tanzania, we have the large lakes, which have quite a lot of biodiversity, and they're also fresh, and they're able to support quite a significant economy. So there are natural water resources, the lakes, the rivers, and the mountains are very important. We have several water towers that are the source of many of the rivers. And if you are to take a case in point in Mau, which is in western part of Kenya, this supports almost 7 different lakes within the region. And so there's a tight connection between the land use and the climate and also the water resource distribution in various parts of the region. And this also brings into point the issue of transboundary, because some of these lakes that we have in your country, the water tower or the source is in a different country. So we have to recognize this as well, that we are talking about a resource that does not only respect the administrative boundary, but it's coming from a different area. So we sort of need to recognize this interconnectivity that we have with the water resources.
So when you talk about that interconnectivity of the water resources, in some areas, some are drying up. In the other areas, something totally different is happening. The extremes, what do you see?
Yes, we see these extremes quite a bit. As you mentioned, in the last couple of years, I think from around 2010, 2013, we've seen a rise in an increase in lake levels, especially along the rift, Kenyan, East African rift, all the way from Ethiopia down to northern Tanzania in the Manyaras. We've seen the lake levels increase. In some cases, between almost something like about 40% to some cases up to 70%. So the shoreline has actually regressed and taken up quite a bit of land. Yeah? So there are people who are suffering from flooding in one area. And in other areas, we are experiencing droughts as well. Yeah? So as you can see, when we talk about water resources, we have these two issues at the same time. And it is important for us to be able to start conversations that really are targeted to specific catchments and also be able to identify what are the specific needs of certain areas. If you go to northern Kenya, there's a drought currently. If I go to Lake Victoria region, the people are flooded and they are also experiencing problems with the water there this particular time. So the conversation we need to have now is how do we come up with solutions? First, we need to understand what is going on. And then we come up with solutions that are able to meet this particular challenge that we are experiencing.
Okay, well, when you say we understand what's going on, as we try to understand, we're going to be bringing on Professor Gordon from Ghana. Now, when we look at Professor Gordon, if you could just join us now, bring you in. You have also been a part of a number of studies, taking a look at the water resources and water as well. What do you see? How is climate change affecting these water resources and water?
Oh, thank you very much for the opportunity given me. And I'll continue from where Dr. Olaka, has ended. The problem is basically either too much water, too little water, or water that is too polluted. And in each of these three domains, you have direct impacts in the resources of the water. That is that biota that lives in the water. I'm very glad, Rita, you started off with this issue of the number of people under water stress, and that is the current number, the 250 million. And in 8 years, the number of people who will be impacted is going to go up to close to 1 billion. But the fundamental link between renewable water and climate change in terms of rise in temperatures, for every 1 centigrade rise in temperature, you have a 20% drop in renewable water. Now, as many countries are already under water scarcity and water stress, with increasing populations, this is going to have severe impact. That is the water as a resource itself. When you go into the resources that are contained, both in the fresh water and the brackish water that we have, that means huge impact on the amount of resources that humans can draw from it, mainly being fish. But it doesn't stop at fish. It goes beyond fish, it goes into the communities of organisms that live in water that contribute to our lives. I'll give you just one example, then I'll end. Um, if you look at mosquitoes, the greatest predator of mosquitoes are dragonflies. And it's estimated that one dragonfly consumes up to 1 or 2,000 mosquitoes, depending on the species of dragonfly, per day. If you disturb our freshwater systems and create habitats that can no longer support dragonflies, the mosquitoes can breed in old car tires. You have removed the predator of the mosquitoes, then we have problems of dengue, problems of malaria, etc., etc. So everything is tightly woven together. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gordon. Now, Eric, you're joining us here. You're not a scientist per se, but you're someone who is providing a solution through the Equity Group for a number of communities that have been impacted by what we're talking about this afternoon. What do you see when you go to the communities?
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you to Nation Media. And this is a very important topic and very timely because, and I'll start where the professors ended, that this thing is so intertwined that when you talk about climate change, then water resources is at the middle of everything because water speaks into food security. Professor has spoken about health. Water scarcity or more of it speaks into health issues. I estimate that the next conflict in our communities, in the region and in Africa will be about water scarcity. Communities fighting for a scarce resource. And this is what we are seeing on the ground. And we were told in the last panel that was here, I can't remember the panelist, that human beings can survive just a couple of days without water. And when I look at this room, I see a lot of bottles of water. I'm sure we consumed quite a bit of water since yesterday. Our economic activity, whether it's industries, value addition, they are driven by a commodity called water. So water is so central, and when you connect climate change to water, then we are staring at a catastrophe because of that interconnectedness. And we are beginning to see this. We are beginning to see food production going down because of water, or water that is contaminated. We are beginning to see conflict in communities because of water, grazing lands, and all that. And therefore, when we bring this topic of water, where we start as equity is at the very basic level. That family that is want to survive the next day and they want to grow their food, how do they get water? That cow that is about to die, I was told the other day that the cows that we are seeing on television and next to the nation media for highlighting this, they don't die because of lack of food. It's dehydration. Cows can survive in 2 months without food, but they cannot survive a couple of days without water. So how then do we work with our communities to make sure that they have sufficient water? And not just to have some sufficient water, is how they utilize that water. So we bring the element of water efficiency. How do you utilize that water? So we run programs around water harvesting and storage. And in the last year alone, we've installed capacity of about 100 million liters of water storage to our communities. And we crowd in partners, we've crowded in partners that are able to work with us, and de-risking partners who are able to de-risk the clients so that they're able to borrow to increase their water storage. Because you're seeing now with climate change, then rainwater is becoming also scarce. It's coming, 2 or 3 weeks, there's no rain, like you can see. But then how do we increase our storage capacities in such a way that during drier periods, then communities have some water that can make them survive, and that they can irrigate their land, they can feed their animals. So that's one area. The second area is also looking at the underground water. Another area that we are making significant investment with our partners to bring underground water is available in areas where it's available. Then it comes the issues of how then do you desalinate, because we've seen a correlation between the quality of the underground water with food security, for example. So desalination technologies, they're expensive, and that's why we need to discuss a little bit more in terms of the financing model for desalination of water. The other thing, of course, that's talking about is water efficiency, to make sure that when communities store water, whether it's in dams or shallow wells and all that, how then do you use that water efficiently? And that's why we're financing and training our farmers, even moving away from drip irrigation to technology like the variable rate irrigation systems that have moisture sensors that only release small amount of water to the crop when the moisture contents become low. And that's now you're utilizing water efficiently. And we're also working with builders and all that. And yesterday there was a very interesting panel here on that was talking about smart cities and green buildings and all that. Because that's the other area we're investing significant to make sure that our buildings are consuming as little water as possible. So the one that you have stored can take you a little longer before the next rain comes. So the solutions have started at the household level, at the business level, even before we look at the global level, how do we increase water security? The urgency now is adaptation at the local level so that we assist our households and our farmers.
Well, thank you. Now, when you talk about the ability for us to manage what we have as we try to get more, and also to give those who do not have, what you're mentioning is the small scale. But could it be possible that each and every community within Africa could be able to have this? Well, we'll have Dr. Lydia tell us about the response and the possible solutions to the particular catastrophe that Eric is mentioning that we might see coming our way.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to continue on with what Mr. Naivasha has said, there is a need for water to be stored, as he has mentioned. And there are various ways of storing water, especially to absorb the shock whenever there are these droughts. Yeah? And there are a range of ways in which can be used. One key example, of course, is the rainwater harvesting, whereby you have the container when you have a roof. But in some homes or some rural areas, we know they have either grass thatched or some grasses, and it's really, or plastic, and it's not really easy to capture water from the roof with these kinds of traditional houses. So there are different ways in which you can have these sort of rock catchments that are able to collect water and store them, either by having a storage facility in the ground, but also another good way that is also used is basically to try and replenish the aquifers. So basically the rock, the water-bearing rock that is underground that we are getting water from, in the dry areas, we are actually taking more or faster than they can replenish. So it is important to carry out this managed aquifer recharge, yeah? And this is a technology that is already out there at different scales. There are the simple ones, but we also have the highly engineering, those that require a little bit of engineering to be able to carry out. But of course, for this, again, a lot of research also needs to be done because it has to be targeted to the rock type of that particular area. So we would like to encourage a lot of, financiers to put in some money in the R&D so that we can be able to specifically pick out areas which can be recharged. And this water will be there, especially with the groundwater. It can actually be there for a longer time. And it could also help with the dilution, because if you're using rainwater, it can also help with diluting already salinated water that we get in the drylands. And with that, the levels of salinity and many other things are reduced. So it's such a good technique that can be used to do that.
Now, one thing that you have both mentioned, just in this small space of time, is the need for the money for this particular, for what we want to see happen. In Israel, what you mentioned, the aquifer recharge, is already, it has happened, it has been a success there, but it is not the cheapest thing. And a number of solutions that are being discussed. Yes, we may say as an African continent, we want money to be put on so many different sectors, one of them now being water. It's a very important conversation, as the speakers have highlighted. Engineer Talmon Shimon is joining us virtually, and he was a former water commissioner in Israel. Between 2000 and 2006, he was able to have and leave behind a thriving water sector there. And we'll just bring him on board because, as we have, maybe I have mentioned and they have mentioned, the aquifer and a number of these things are going to require money. The sacrifice was made, but Tal would like us to take us through what it meant, what it took for you to get to this thriving water sector that we now see in Israel and do talk of. I think, Tal, your mic might be muted.
Sorry.
Yes, now we can hear you.
Thank you very much, Rita. I enjoyed very much to listen to the other panelists. In Israel, we are very concerned, as everybody around the world, because of the global warming and the effects on water resources, the trends, the effects of the global warming on the water sector, and of course the consequences about agriculture, etc. And you know, whoever deals with water management knows that we are working under a lot of uncertainties. How much will be the population growth? How much will be the water consumption? What the size of agriculture that we need in our country and other places? And of course, the international agreements about water, you mentioned it before. And on the top of it, we have now the uncertainty that is connected to the global warming. And you know, experts are telling us that there is a very severe effect of the global warming on our water resources. And they said to us that within 40, 30, maybe 50 years, we will have less precipitation of 10%, maybe 15%, and it will affect the water resources by less of 20% or so on. But it's a long-term effect on the management of the water sector and on water resources. But what is happening this afternoon and maybe tomorrow morning? If you look at some data about many countries in Africa and in the Middle East, you can see there are countries with renewable freshwater resources of 3,000 to 4,000 cubic meter per capita per year. But the withdrawal and the use of the water is not more than 2 or 3%. Even in dry areas that you have about 100, maybe 300 cubic meter per year per capita, the withdrawal is only 15%, maybe 30%. So, and if you take into account how many people are lucky to get a safe water supply, it's about 60%, maybe in some countries 80%, and much less for sanitation services, 20 to 40%. So, and now every year, you know, it's in Israel, we have a population growth of 1.8% that needs water, that needs food, etc. And I don't know what happens in Africa, but I think that it's more or less the same. Now, we have a lot of water resources. We use only a small amount of water, and there is lack of water, reliable water supply, and lack of services. This is the situation today, and we cannot blame the global warming on the everyday problem that we have to tackle in the water management. So I think that we need to build a sustainable water management in each country that we will be able to solve the everyday problem. And after this, we will be able to solve also the global warming effect on our water resources. You know that in Israel, we invested a lot of efforts in order to build a sustainable water management. We made a lot of reforms. Some of them were very painful reforms. People had suddenly started to pay much more for water and for the services. And at the end of the day, we build such a management that can tackle every problem in the water sector that is rising. For example, during 2012 and 2017, we had the most severe drought period in Israel. Nobody felt there is no water in the tap. You open the tap and you add the water. Farmers could irrigate their field and had a reliable water supply. It is because we began to manage our water sector on a sustainable way and on a reliable way and under very sustainable principles that enable us to do it. So personally, I think that advanced water management can solve the problem of today and also can tackle with and deal with the future problems or the coming consequences of the global warming. And if I have time, I can tell you a little bit what Israel was doing, but it's up to you, Rita.
Well, Tal, there's no time, but we can definitely pick your mind on one thing. In 2000, what you mentioned, the success story going through a drought from 2012 to 2017, all came from 2000 when you had to ask for that money, the financing for this advanced system that you were able to put up. How easy was it? How hard was it?
One of the most important principles in water management is the financial sustainability of the water sector. Water sector cannot compete on a part of the national budget with security problems, with education, with transportation, with health, etc. So we need that the water tariffs will be based on the real expenses. So this is the way to motivate the water sector and to do whatever is needed. Tariffs should be according to the real expenses. Of course, when you start very huge water systems in your country, you need also the help of the government, this is for sure. But we have to reach to a point when all the expenses will be covered by water tariffs. And this is also will create the atmosphere for the private sector to come and to invest because they will feel secure to receive the money back from the water tariff. And I think that this is a long way It cannot be done in one day, especially in places where people are not used to pay for water. But this is one of the main principles that every country should act in order to fulfill this principle.
Thank you, Tal. Now, it's no secret that my eyes are now going to turn and give my next question to Eric. When it comes to financing, when he mentions if we can join with the private sector, knowing the returns that will come in the long run.
Thanks. And I think Professor Azil said it, because the problem we have in this region when it comes to financing water infrastructure is what we call non-revenue water. And that is what Professor was talking about, the tariffs. There's so much water, but very little get paid for. So in terms of investment, then from a private investor who wants to come and invest, take a loan, invest in water infrastructure, then that's the bridge we need to. And that's what Israel got so right. They reduced their non-revenue water significantly so that the private sector can come in and invest, and they know they can get their money back. But following up on your question then, what we are lacking then is enough investments in water infrastructure. You spoke about areas with good supply of water. Then you have other areas with low water. So the water is there, but it's not available. I normally say water is everywhere other than from your in the tap. How do we harness that water? I lived in a country one time where, very dry country, and they had an integrated water collection system, and they used to collect billions of cubic meters of water from the roads. The roads are built in such a way that all the runoff from the road goes into a reservoir, is treated, and comes back to a house. And you could stay there for 4 years, it rains once, and they have enough water to take the country forward, whether it's in industries, in your farms, and in your... So it's lack of investment. There's underinvestment in water infrastructure. And this is where the government needing to help us in reducing non-revenue water. Technology needs to play, a point. We've seen our technologies that attracts, investors who are coming, even in the bank, to look for money. To invest in water technology that reduces non-revenue water, so that make sure any water that flows through a pipe, somebody pays for it. Somebody pays for it. It can be free in your tap, but there's somebody who is paying for that water. That's why we're going to see even banks, we're going to see private sector, we are going to see public-private partnerships coming through to increase water infrastructure in this country, including desalination of water, because we still have a lot of water in dry areas, but cannot be used. Doesn't help anyone. You go to other countries in Southeast Asia and all that, you find 90% of their water comes from underground, and they have technologies, they have invested. So I think that is what we need to, and it's a partnership. And I think we also need to innovate on the financing models, because we now need to bring in blended finance. We need to have the risking instrument. We have to innovate around the business models around water. We have to look at the public-private partnerships in delivery of water, including PPAs in water. And I like, the government is trying to think through PPAs in water delivery, because, as I've said, there is, and I like what the professor said, let's not blame climate change for everything that we are suffering. We can still manage the resource that we have if we increase our investment in water resource management. Okay.
And speaking of increasing investment, when you also mentioned partnerships, Dr. Lydia, before we jump on to Professor Gordon, you are within the universities. A lot of research is carried out there. There's also possible partnerships there to help in financing and also making sure that perhaps this scarcity that we talk of or we see coming our way could be averted.
Yes. I think what is really important for the universities is to get some funding. And most of the problems that we have that we want to solve around the water, sector. We will not be able to solve them if we do not understand them. One of the key things that we have to recognize now is that we are living in the Anthropocene. Basically, humans have impacted everything. And even the water that we are talking about, it's polluted quite significantly. We are here in Nairobi. No one can drink this Nairobi water from here to at least 200 meters downstream. It's totally polluted. So we are looking at two things. There's the climate aspect that is going to either increase exacerbate whatever we are having, but already it is polluted and it's continuing to be polluted. So these are two things that we have to look at the same time. It's not the natural water that we had before. So I'd really encourage a lot of, especially if they're, just to encourage the private sector together with the government to increase financing for research activities in the university. So for example, if a bank is interested in carrying out something or putting up some water pan somewhere, why don't they partner with the researchers carrying out water and they're within the universities so that we can understand that system better? Because in many of the places where some of these dams or open pans have been done, we end up having some pollution issues and many other things that come up after they have done that. So I think R&D is really important going forward, not only because of climate change, but also just because we still do not understand many of these areas. And we receive very little grants to be able to carry out research. And as it was said here before, much of the financing or the grants that we receive at the universities are normally from the outside. And so somebody else sets the agenda. It would really be good when a company knows that it wants to increase water in a certain area, partnering with some of the, mainly the research institutions, would be much more beneficial because we'll have that information. Another key thing that goes hand in hand with that is monitoring. There's quite a lack of data or monitoring in many of the water resources. Like if you wanted to find out how much water is flowing through a certain river or level, just like getting to know the sub-daily changes within our water system, we really do not have this. We have very few, as much if you are to count all of them, we have very few within the country, though if you look at Kenya compared to some other parts of Africa, you find that they have much less. But there are two key things. Monitoring is important. Monitoring the climate, the weather, the rainfall, temperature changes, humidity, all those things, and also monitoring the water resource, the surface, and also in the ground. Then that way we can really understand what is going on. Because if you want to project the climate, even of a place like Kenya, we have such a diverse topography. You are in a cool area in Timau, you drive down 25 kilometers and 50 kilometers, and you're in a totally arid area. And now we are using a weather station in a wet area to try and understand what is going on in the dry area. So monitoring is not at the level which we need it to be at to help us to understand how this system is so that we can be able to project the future.
Okay. Now another thing that we need to look at is the mindset. Professor Gordon, just to bring you back here into the conversation, you have been a part of different policies that have been crafted and created, one of them being the one of climate change policy of Ghana, one of the best, arguably, within the continent. But you're a firm believer that as much as there's policy, there's also a need for a change in a mindset. If we have the right mindset, we'll have the government on board, we'll have the private sector not being needed to be reminded perhaps there's a profit here, but seeing before even the profit, this is what the community needs. Professor Gordon?
Yes. You know, one of the things that we are good at in Africa is writing documents. What we fail to do is to implement. Currently, we have a document, a very good document, called the African Water Vision to 2025, which is just 3 years away. And when you look at the content of that document, they talk about something called water wisdom. Now, as far as I know, wisdom comes from the mind. So it is the mindset that we need to change. We need to change the way we look at water. We are used to having free water, and we've had situations where people have got pipes in communities near rivers, and the argument is, I've always fetched from the river. Why should I bother to take water from the tap where I have to pay? Not recognizing the difference between treated water and raw water. So we need to change the way we look at water. But remember, this conversation is taking place in the context of climate change. And one of the things that has been emphasized over and over again in the IPCC reports is that climate change is going to be a magnifier of all the ills, all the challenges that the developing countries face. A report that was released at the COP27 in Egypt talked about how do we look at fresh water and climate change mitigation. That is, how do we use the management of freshwater resources to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Now, we've been talking about finance. If we can demonstrate by use of integrated water resource management, by use of nature-based solutions, we can have a situation where we can reduce our greenhouse emissions. That means we will be able to qualify for green climate funding. So we have to be a little more ambitious in the way we think, get out of the silos of water resource management, climate change adaptation, climate change mitigation, and try to see that common ground where you have coordination and strengthening of joint water and climate governance. But the fact is, many of our decision makers still do not appreciate the magnitude and the direction that we are heading towards this climate disaster and the water resource deficit. The panelists have already talked about the need to be aware that the next war in Africa may be around water. We've talked about the need and cost of the infrastructure, but you also have to ask yourself, who is benefiting from the current situation where plastic is being used to package water, either in rubber bags or in plastic bottles? Why is the infrastructure not being repaired or upgraded? Somebody is benefiting. And that is because those people have the mindset of not caring about the other people. The people who are supposed to regulate and control such people have a mindset which is very far from good governance. I don't want to use certain words that are often associated with Africa. But if we do the right thing, if we look at the water problem in Africa holistically, looking at the issues of biodiversity, the economics, the technical aspect of it, and most importantly, the culture. If we do not incorporate all these elements together, we are not going to move forward. So the solution that I'm proposing is that we need to improve the water literacy, just as we've been trying to address climate literacy. The water we drink now has microplastics, it has phthalates, it has all sorts of chemicals, novel entities that we don't know the impact they'll have on our bodies. As has been mentioned by Lydia, we need the research, but when somebody is desperate for water to drink, and you tell them don't drink that water because maybe in 10 years' time, your sperm count will go to 0, it's not going to work. So we need to come up with realistic solutions, pragmatic, targeted towards the people who are suffering the most, and try and use these international funding opportunities. Because as has been pointed out by our colleague from Israel, these are things that are very expensive. But I will tell you that the cost of doing nothing now is far, far more than the cost of doing the interventions over the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gordon. Now, when he talks about being ambitious, wanting us as the African continent to be ambitious, it goes to a thing that is now being discussed and was discussed earlier on in the panel before this, the blue economy. We're going to get into the blue economy in just a bit, Eric. If you have any questions, any comments, we'll be passing the mic around shortly, right after Eric answers this question. This blue economy, you're a champion of it within the Equity Group. Take us through it. For some, they've heard of it. I know about it. Someone within here or online may not know about it, and why it's so important at a time like this when we talk about water and resources.
Thank you, Rita. Blue economy, and I'm happy my colleagues championing blue economy also in the room, Reshma here. Is how do we harness the resources of the ocean for economic development without endangering the health of our oceans and our water bodies. And when you look at the ocean resources, you start upstream. All the plastics that Professor is talking about end up in our seas, in our lakes. And I think Raleigh mentioned about the death of the fish suffocating in water because of lack of oxygen, because of pollution of the lake. That's what it is. Lack of oxygen in the lake speaks to lack, pollution inside the lake. So, blue economy has the potential to uplift the region out of poverty. The planet is 70% water and 30% land. There is something in there that with technology we can use to grow, to have food security, and to, if you look at countries like Singapore, 60-70% of their GDP is from blue economy, and they have invested significantly in that. So there's something that we can, get from there, and that's what we have said as a bank. We want to, champion blue economy in a significant way, crowding partners, right from restoration of marine ecosystems, because that's important. Looking at the mangroves, looking at in this country, for example, we have the capacity to have 350 tons of fish a year. We do 9. We do 9,000 tons out of the potential of 3. So there's a lot of resources. But then with climate change, with the rising temperatures in the sea, the marine ecosystem is getting depleted. But we are saying we can do something about it, so that we are able to harness the resources of the blue economy. And that is what we are championing in Equity. And we have our whole department now looking at how do we protect marine ecosystems, how do we harness business through blue ecosystems.
Okay. Any questions that we might have from the audience? Okay. You can just start with your name, your question, who it's directed to. There's a gentleman at the back, and then we'll come to the lady right here at the front. We'll take only 3 questions for the start.
Thank you. I'm an environment ecologist at the Wildlife Research and Training Institute. We are talking about water being as a natural resource. And so my question, first of all, I'm not directing it to anyone, but I want to highlight the state of the rivers that are in Nairobi. First of all, I do not think we have any rivers in Nairobi. These are not rivers, but are tributaries to the Athi, Galana, Sabaki River. And all of these streams that are flowing in Nairobi are currently polluted. Climate change is going to affect water, and water is going to be one of the most resource that is going to be fought for. So what is happening right now, we are seeing encroachment on the riparian lands, on the river lands. We are seeing contamination of all water bodies. The Galana Athi Sabaki River has completely been contaminated, and it is sad to see that the water resource cannot be used. It has been rendered useless. And this is happening in even the Rift Valley where I live. The school is located in Rift Valley. For example, the Lake Naivasha is a freshwater lake, but we cannot even use it for fishing because people say the fish from that lake is contaminated. People cannot use its waters, and they have to dig. They have to have boreholes for water, which is highly fluorinated. So when you're talking about water being a natural resource, we are also talking. Kenya is very particular about asking for money from the European countries. From an environmental perspective, it's right. We call it the polluter pays principle, where the parties responsible for producing pollution should also be responsible for mitigating pollution. But I also think the polluter pays principle should be applied on a local concept. Nairobi too should be put on the hotspot for continuously contaminating all the rivers that are flowing in Nairobi, all the water systems that are flowing in Nairobi are currently contaminated with agriculture, they have low oxygen, and the people downstream are the ones who are being affected. They cannot use the water for farming, they cannot use the water for drinking, they cannot use the water for doing anything, for even feeding their livestock. And this river also passes in one of the most concentrated wildlife area.
Because you're looking for solutions.
Yeah, we are looking for.
Because you've highlighted all the problems that you have.
And
those problems are many. What is your solution? In 30 seconds, what is your solution?
I've heard people talking about planting trees. What I've not heard is about planting, of having grasses. You know, grasses also, for example, the mountain bamboo is one of the grass species that cleans water. Grasses also hold water and enable regeneration of the groundwater.
Okay, so we plant more grass and plant bamboos that purify water.
Bamboo is also a grass.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have a lady right here at the front. As the mic comes to her, Professor Gordon would like to respond to you. Over to you, Professor Gordon.
Thank you, and thank you for the intervention that you made. Now, one of the big problems you have in all cities, and Nairobi is one of my favorite cities. The only problem is the altitude is too high for people from Ghana who live at sea level, is that you are converting your soft surface into hard surface. This contributes to the flooding. This contributes to the amount of runoff you have. It diminishes the value of any wetlands you have in the area. So an immediate solution is to have that groundwater recharge through urban wetlands, which not only help with infiltration into the groundwater, but also produce ambience and other ecosystem services. You find that many of the driveways in Nairobi, especially in, is it Ruka? I think that's the Ruka area, are all asphalt or cemented, concreted. You have driveways that allow infiltration of water. Rainwater harvesting. So you don't have that huge amount of water after 2 hours of heavy rain in Nairobi. You know better than I that many of the roads in some parts are impassable. So there are solutions which involve use of nature wisely. There's something we call green architecture, where the architects don't follow the old systems. Sorry, I should be careful. The old systems of architecture, that are traditional systems, were very environmentally friendly. We have now followed Western tradition in or what is seen as a nice building in such a way that it is not really fit for purpose unless you have a lot of energy to either heat or cool the building. So my solution to all of these things is, let us look at what we are doing and move away from the business as usual approach, because that is not working. And this is a problem that the youth among us need to take up, because they are the ones who are going to be suffering in 2050, in 2080, when the climate crunch really hits Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gordon. Our last question, I'd ask that you be brief.
Thank you, Rita. My name is Sally Chepkorir, and I'm glad to be here. But first of all, permit me to salute the management, the board of Nation Media Group for inviting me here. I'll go straight to the question. Blue bonds are associated with the blue economy and oceans. How are they linked to climate change action and sustainable development?
Okay. Eric, I believe you'll answer this.
Yeah, we're talking now about, green bonds, where you can raise money in capital markets to invest in green initiatives. But when it comes to ocean resources, as you know, oceans have better carbon sinks than even the trees we are planting. And therefore, when we conserve marine ecosystems and rehabilitate our coastlines, when we do seaweed farming, seaweed is a very big carbon sink globally. So when we rehabilitate our marine ecosystems and reduce pollution in our oceans and in our water bodies, and use our resources within the oceans sustainably, and get our farmers to go to the coast and do seaweed farming, which is a very good carbon sink, then we have off-takers globally who are able to get those credits, the blue credits now, because they're coming from the blue economy. And therefore, you are also able then to raise your blue bonds to be able to invest in the blue economy. So, so we have the green bonds, and then we have the blue bonds which are coming into play that allows you to raise capital in the capital markets to invest in the blue economy, and especially in such a way that conserves the health of the marine ecosystems.
Thank you, Eric. Now, we're going to bring Tal back on board, and as we wrap up, I want to, since the next panel is all about the hope, I want us to imagine, to all our panelists, let's step away from reality. Let's step away from all the statistics that are pointing us to the next 8 years and what it could possibly be like. The negative. What could possibly be the positive? What kind of African continent would we be seeing if at all we handled water, managed it right, were able to sustainably use it? And what would we, if we're able to treat the water resources, the aquatic life right, what would we see? Tal, we'll start with you, definitely looking at it from the point of water management. We'll try to get to Tal. I'll start with you, yes. Dr. Lydia. If Tal is there, let's just go to him.
Yes. Thank you, Rita. I think that, you know, water management is not cut and paste. Principles that are good in one place might not fit for the management of the water sector in other places. But I think that in order to gain a very good water management that can deal with all the problems that exist and can also find solutions to the coming effects of the global warming. I think that there is things that should be done in order to advance the management in each region or each country, in order that we will be able to start working on the real problems that we have with water supply and sanitation services.
Thank you, Tal. Dr. Lydia?
I think for the water sector, one of the things that I think really needs to be done is, first, we have to recognize that water is already facing a number of challenges, one being pollution. And this is increasing. And climate change only comes in to exacerbate this. So for me, one of the key things that I'd really like to see is monitoring of these water systems. And monitoring will help us in a number of ways. One, we would be able to know when the oxygen levels are going down in the lake, and we are not surprised when thousands of fish have died. And secondly, we will also be able to know when a flood is coming, especially if the rivers are monitored at sub-daily level. We can actually tell in advance that in 3 hours the flood will be at this particular point. So basically having a sustainable management of these catchment systems, having transboundary partnerships, of any of the water bodies, and monitoring should go hand in hand with all the other things that we are going to do. And of course, with monitoring, we have to connect this with the research, R&D, so that we can be able to understand the system and explain it, because it will always be evolving as the climate evolves. So we need to be able to understand it at each point as we go on.
Okay. Professor Gordon, I'll throw the question to you as well.
Well, for the best to happen, we need to have capacity. And I've taken all the points that others have spoken about: blue economy, the need for monitoring, the need to have integrated water resource management. But the question is, do we have the people? Do we have internally the capacity within Africa to look at this thing in a holistic and coordinated way over the period? If we do, if we change our mindset in how we appreciate water, if we think nature positive, yes, I think within the next decade, we will see some changes. But there's a lot of negative impetus right now. So to have real change, where we have bent the curve, we talk about bending the curve towards a better and more sustainable system, it's going to take decades, and we have to be realistic in understanding that. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gordon. Lastly to you, Eric.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just add on what has not been said. I think a couple of things one would wish to see is, the first one is social intervention. And that speaks into behavior change in how we look at water. Because it starts with me, it starts with you in terms of how we use that resource. The second one is technology. I think we need to keep innovating on technology. What I was saying about reducing non-revenue water through technology, so that then the private sector can jump in and be able to invest. The other thing, of course, is more innovation in the business models around water. and then financing, innovative financing models around water. And the last thing that one would want to see, because everybody is affected by water, is having all hands on the deck, because everybody is affected by climate change as it affects water. And just to give you an example quickly, the Adi Tana Tower, water tower, there are corporates in Nairobi that came together and said, we are going to rehabilitate that tower, all the way from Abadeas, looking at siltation, looking at how people have enclosed near the river, and planting trees and grass and bamboo, as we've been advised there. So there's corporates that are actually doing that. And even during this dry spell, you didn't see very many rations of water in Nairobi because of the work that corporates are doing in that water tower. So all hands needs to be on the deck to be able to solve this problem. Thank you.
Okay. A special thank you to all our panelists who have been a part of the conversation on climate, water, and its resources. We were joined by Dr. Lydia Atieno Olaka, who is a senior lecturer at the Nairobi Technical University of Kenya. Thank you for joining us. Next to her, she was joined by Mr. Eric Naivasha, who is an associate director, energy and environment at the Equity Group Foundation. Thank you for joining us. And virtually, we were joined by Engineer Tal Shimon from Israel. He is the former water commissioner. And we're also joined by Professor Gordon Christopher, who joined us from Ghana. He is a founding director, Institute of Environmental and Sanitation Studies, the University of Ghana. Thank you so much to you all.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Rita, for that engagement. And of course, I know we are very eager to ask very many questions for our panelists, and sorry if we don't get to you on time with your question. It doesn't mean that we don't value your question, we value them very much. We're moving on to the next panel, but I'm going to just ask us if you have a comment, and I'm asking anybody, and it's going to be random, if you can maintain it to 30 seconds, and this is just for me, 30 seconds, because that's the length of a TikTok video. And if you want to get people interested, please keep it short. The length of a TikTok video if you want to attract the next generation. So maybe I ask you, out of this, do you have any comment? 30 seconds, when you talk about issues of water resources. What have you picked from that?
Okay.
Thank you, Mabel. Did it?
10 seconds already gone. Okay,
No. Okay. Okay, my name is Peggy.